Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, the moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap for you guys today, but before we do kick it off, I have a couple housekeeping items I need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be receiving a link post-event that you can access the webinar on demand. And also, we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have a question for our panelists at any time during today's webinar, just use your control panel there, type in your question. We'll take a few minutes before the end of the webinar and we'll go through some of those questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Measuring DevOps Performance. Measuring performance, see the science of DevOps measurement in action. Our speakers today are Dr. Nicole Forsgren, who is Chief Scientist and CEO at DevOps Research and Assessment, and Robert Reeves, who is co-founder and CTO at Datical. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining me.
How's it going?
Well, thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I believe, Nicole, you are taking the reins for this webinar, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to you and let you get going.
Yes, I know. Look out when I'm in charge. How's it going today, Robert?
It's going great. I get to, geek out with my favorite DevOps person, and we get to talk about all sorts of cool stuff when it comes to figuring out how do we fix this problem that our geeks are facing. How do we measure it? How do we improve?
I know. It's like my favorite topic. So, I figure we can do a little bit of intro in case people don't know us. So I'll introduce me and you introduce you. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, so I'm Nicole Forsgren. As our lovely moderator mentioned, I'm CEO and Chief Scientist at Dora. I do a bunch of stuff around measurement in the DevOps space. I'm lead investigator. Most people know me as lead investigator on the State of DevOps reports, which I've done with the fabulous team at Dora, Gene Kim, Jez Humble. We also partnered up with the team at Puppet in the past, and moving forward, we'll be doing it with Google. In the past, I was also a software and a hardware engineer. I also used to manage my systems. And now I do, as I mentioned, a bunch of stuff around measurement. So I am super excited about today's topic. And we also have a recent book out called Accelerate, where we also talk more about how to build and scale high-performing technology organizations and how measurement kind of plays into that.
Well, I am Robert Reeves, and I am a recovering release manager. It is, as most of the people that are on this webinar can attest, it is an exciting and rewarding and painful position to have. I've been doing, I like to say, I've been doing DevOps since before DevOps was cool. And my first title when I was doing this was Software Configuration Manager, if that gives you an indicator of exactly how old I am. But I am CTO and co-founder of a company called Datical. And what we do is we help bring database release automation to our customers' software delivery process. One of the things that it really excites me about this webinar is that we really get into the details, the nuts and bolts of how do we properly measure how we're doing. Because if you can't measure something, you can't improve it. And that is the first step. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, all of our listeners, people attending, will have a better understanding of what to measure and also what not to measure.
Oh, that is true. So between the two of us, we probably have some stories.
One or two.
A couple. Okay, so here we go. Here's what we're going to be going over today, basically. We're going to talk about measuring performance, things to remember, common mistakes, an example of a good measure, right? Like what you said, right? Things to measure, common mistakes. And then where are you? We'll also talk about maturity models, which right now is probably one of my favorite rants, right? Where they're broken. I love it. Um, like where they just don't work, because they just don't work places. Although, like, I'll give a concession, there's a place where they work. We'll also talk a little bit about learning theory, right? And then like a great takeaway, right? Where everyone here can help. So that's kind of our basic roadmap, although I'm pretty sure, Robert, given the two of us, we'll have a couple super fun tangents. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll see where this goes. So here we go. The most important thing when we measure are two things. The first is we should be measuring outcomes and not outputs, right? What is it that we want to be achieving for the company, for the organization, for our teams? And then the second is we should be focusing on global measures and not local measures. Team measures and not individual measures. Because when we do it the other way around, things like get gamed, right? Okay, so two guidelines. Outcomes, not outputs, and global or team measures and not local or individual measures. Two things. I probably should have written those down. It's fine. Take notes at home. I'll send out notes. Okay. Oh, I did write them down. Sorry, my bad. Okay.
Well, we can enforce it again because this is important stuff.
I know.
You know,
it's almost like I knew this was going to come up.
You know, I look at the end of the day, all right, what our companies want to do is they want to deliver software to their customers to have a better user experience. But look, this ain't no hippie commune. We're doing this for a reason. We're doing this to increase revenue. We're doing this to cut costs.
Yep.
And if we start measuring, the outputs of the dev team, of the test team, of all these different teams, we're not measuring the real outcome that benefits our company, which is how quickly does that software get into the hands of that end user. We're not in the business. Datical customers, all IT company or all IT groups, all companies in the world are not in the business of getting a release from dev to test. They're in the business of getting that software out to the customer to engage them better, to have higher performance. That is what needs to be measured. And to, yes, these other, these individual outcomes, these team outputs, yes, that's helpful. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter until that software is in your customer's hand. It does you no good.
Or you know what? If that's all you're measuring, then that's all people are going to focus on, and they'll optimize for that, and they might end up unintentionally, right? Unintended consequences.
Oh yeah.
They'll inadvertently, unintentionally sabotage or like hamstring the other team's work, because of course they're going to like optimize their own behavior because that's where they're going to be getting incentivized.
Absolutely. One of those things, I think a really good example, I think it is we were working with a large financial services company, and they had moved a system administrator to a different group where this sysad was learning infrastructure as code as opposed to just handling tickets. And they were measuring tickets, how quickly you closed, stuff on that other team. And this,
I'm so excited for the story.
Oh yeah. And the system administrator went to the new boss and said, hey, I'm getting paid less with this new role. And the manager, being a good manager, said, oh no, something happened with HR. Oh my goodness. We got to get this fixed. And the sysad said, oh, well, wait a minute. The base is the same. I'm just no longer getting overtime. And the new manager said, excuse me, what are you talking about? and the sysad said, yeah, whenever somebody on the team needed to, get some stuff for Christmas or vacations coming up and needed some extra scratch, they would go on call. And by being on call, they would handle more tickets, and they would get paid more for overtime. And the incentive for that person to improve what they were doing was zero. They were actually paid to not fix it. Yes, just to handle that stuff. That was an eye-opener for that company, that they were actually incenting, they were looking at outputs, not outcomes, and they were actually incenting a negative outcome while incenting a positive output.
Okay, see, brilliant. Okay, so everybody keep that in mind. Outcomes over outputs, global or team measures over local or individual measures. These are the most common mistakes that I see in productivity. Common mistakes. Here we go. Lines of code, velocity, and utilization. It's so funny. As we look through lines of code, people are like, well, Nicole, you're crazy. Here's the thing. People come to me, so working in Dora, we do a lot of stuff around assessment, right? So most people know us through the State of DevOps report, but people come to us for assessment all the time as well. At least once a month, someone comes to me and they're still using lines of code. Now, I can't blame them, right? Because it's super easy to measure, right? Someone can write a script and like, you've got your lines of code. Here's the thing. More isn't better. All that does is it gives us bloated software, gives us higher maintenance costs, it gives us higher cost of change. And like it makes it super hard to like read through and understand what's happening. Now, the opposite isn't better either. Less isn't better. So I was a university professor for a handful of years, and there's always these like crazy and awesome and ridiculous contests where it's like, see how much you can accomplish in the least amount of code possible. So you get these like single lines of code that can basically like change a tire, but no one can read it. So the opposite isn't better either, because once you get that code in your code base, it's not maintainable. So you want like the perfect middle where you solve business problems with the most efficient code. And then people come back to me and they're like, well, but how do I measure that? How do I know, like, how many lines of code is most efficient? And I'm like, wait, that's not the goal. It's outcomes, not output.
Well, it's
right?
like going
we violated that rule.
It's like going to a grocery store, or no, even better, a buffet, and they weigh you before and after you leave. Before you.
This is amazing. Also, I'm never doing it.
Oh yeah, and what I would do is you just walk in with put some a bunch of pocket change in your pockets,
yes.
and then just pay for it with the change. And actually, I weigh less now, and so you need to give me money. I mean, so look, this kind of measurement will lead to gamesmanship. And I would, look, if I was starting my career and I was, had a band on the side and I was really phoning it in at work, I would love to be measured on this, because I would refactor code all day long, making it more bloated. I would have so many new line characters. I would game this. In fact, I would probably write a script.
I would even get them to be characters instead of lines, and like write something to automate like space.
Well, then I would have 256
character spaces debate.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would have variable names that went, the 256 character variable names.
Right. It's going to backfire. Okay, so that's our first example. Next up, we have velocity. Now, a lot of people use velocity as a productivity metric. this is for those of us who are not familiar with velocity. In Agile, this comes from Agile. Problems are broken down into stories. Stories are assigned points of estimated effort, okay? And then the team completes these points of effort and the customer signs off on it, right, of accepted points of work. And then moving forward, those points are used to estimate how much work a team can get done. So it's a capacity planning tool, right? It should not be a productivity tool. But why not? Well, here's the thing. Velocity is a relative measure of productivity for a particular team. So it shouldn't be used to compare teams anyway, although it always ends up getting used that way, which is that's a separate side rant. So here's the problem. It gets gamed, right? Which, I mean, some of that you can't blame too many teams because you always want to hit your targets, right? So game it by just a couple points. But here's how it violates our guidelines. It ends up being a local measure and not a global measure. Because, like, here's the thing, right? I have my points. Robert, you have your points. Let's say you come to me with this amazing thing that you need to build, and I have expertise and I can help you build it. I'm not going to help you. There is no way I'm going to help you because it takes effort. And any effort I expend helping you takes away from points that I could complete on my own point goal.
Oh, yeah, it creates a situation where teams are focused on what they're doing and not the impact on the customer.
Right.
And that's just the wrong thing we need to do in our companies.
But that's what we should be doing, right? If that's the global goal and the outcome that's going to make our pretend magical company better, I should absolutely drop what I'm doing if it's not as important. And together we work together, wow, that was reciprocal, Nicole. Together we make something awesome that is going to drive amazing outcomes for the business. Of course I should do that. But I'm like, nope, that's going to hurt my point total. That's going to hurt my velocity. That's the problem. So velocity, also not good. Okay, now, our last example here, utilization. Utilization, okay, it's only good to a point. Many people always assume that higher utilization's better, right? Many times management comes through and they're like, I'm going to get as much work out of my people as possible. This doesn't allow slack for unplanned work, though. And there's always unplanned work, right? Something always comes up. And you know what? We should expect this. When we think about, doing the DevOps, we always talk about development work and building in fast feedback. What do you think fast feedback is? Fast feedback is the allowance for getting work back that broke, that didn't work. So we have to fix it. If it breaks, that means something unexpected happened and I needed to fix it. Well, queuing theory, math, tells me that as utilization approaches 100%, lead times approach infinity. So basically, the same thing applies to people. As we hit higher and higher levels of utilization, lead times take longer and longer and longer to get work done. Like, we know this, right? As my WIP limit, as my to-do list gets longer and longer and longer, it takes me forever to get anything done. I don't know about you, but this one feels so real to me right now. My to-do list I'm getting a little better at it. It's so real.
Real world example. What I've seen is certainly at and certainly Nicole, for you and I, this hits home. This example is the security line at the airport. There is no capacity change. Whether it's a slow day or a busy day. But if there is a large number of folks going through, they're going to be less efficient. You have, work, anybody that's worked retail has seen this. When I was in high school doing retail stuff, work comes in clumps. There would be a rush of people coming in and then it would calm down. And during those periods of calm, we were able to take care of the things we needed to take care of, cleaning up, side work, those sorts of things. When you don't have that, when you don't have that ability to attend to, and in this, in this case, technical debt, those sorts of things, it just gets worse and worse. And this idea that from a manager to say, oh, we need to be at 100% utilization is not understanding how software is built. That there is definitely a time, if there is slack built into a schedule, if we are at less than 100% utilization, the teams will use that time. It's not like they're going to, have the break and then start drinking beer and barbecuing at the office. They're going to continue to work.
Oh my gosh, that email. I'll just answer email.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much stuff that needs to be done. And if you do not put slack in it, if you're saying, oh, my team's at 100% utilization and you're proud of that as a manager, you're doing it wrong. You are a bad manager and you should feel bad.
I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. Yeah, that's real. So we've walked through a few examples of like not good productivity measures. So what are some good examples? One example is software delivery performance. Okay, a few people who've heard my talks before are probably going to roll their eyes at me because I use this a lot. We've used this in our State of DevOps reports, but here's why it ends up being a pretty good measure, okay? It's because it focuses on both outcomes and global measures. So it's an outcome because it's software development and delivery. So it's what happens to the code that you have developed and delivered at the end of the process, right? So it's when dev, test, QA, ops, InfoSec, database have gotten IT ops, right? We've gotten through that whole process. It's not just, like you mentioned, Robert, it's not just taking it from, test to QA in like one round of handoffs. It's when we've pushed it through that entire pipeline. So it's to the end of the process. And it's that global measure because that is where we have finally delivered value. So the whole team has to work together for it to, finger quote, count.
Yeah, we see this. We see this every day at Datical. We talk to customers that are measuring velocity, they're measuring utilization. They're saying, oh, we've got our software out of dev and it's out of test. And it winds up sitting in a queue waiting for the DBAs to get around to making a change. And everybody but the DBAs are satisfied, they're happy, but the application owners, the line of business executives, they look at it and it's not done yet. But everybody else in the company says, oh, we're fine, we're happy. Meanwhile, the customer's waiting on a fix. They're not seeing value for all that other work. And those metrics, when you don't measure that deployment, that final deployment, that push to production, and count that as being done, it leads you to have a skewed view of the world. But if you look at the impact on the customer and the value that you're delivering to the customer, that is a far better metric that directly impacts your top line and your bottom line.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's also why, we like looking at this software delivery performance that's all encompassing, because we found that this is what helps drive value for organizations, right? High performers are twice as likely to meet or exceed their goals in terms of profitability, productivity, market share, effectiveness, efficiency, customer satisfaction. Because just like you said, it's about delivering value. And you can't do that if you're ignoring a key piece of the process. Everyone else can be happy, but it doesn't matter if your customer is not happy. It just doesn't count.
Yeah, the development managers being satisfied with lines of code does not translate well into share price.
Exactly. That is so true. And we have seen that it's possible to get both throughput and stability together. And it's true because in this case, you have the whole team working together, right? Because once you are focusing your team on global measures, then everyone works together, which is nice, right? Like you said, it doesn't count if you only care about lines of code. What we need to do is help move the conversation to help everyone understand that everything matters. And what's interesting is that at first it was just dev and ops, right? Which is probably why we call it DevOps. A few years ago, the conversation started shifting to biz DevOps and then DevSecOps, right? And so we started including security in this conversation more. And I'm starting to see, and I'm sure you're saying this now, Robert, as well, database is taking a more prominent role. I was talking to Lane Campbell about this the other day. We kind of had a DM conversation about this because she wrote Database Reliability, this book with I always want to say Mipsy Tipsy, Charity Majors. I know everyone by their Twitter handles, right? And how you can do agile database work, and I'm sure you've seen this in all of your work at Datical as well, right? Mm-hmm. And how once you start really integrating the extra teams and the extra people, and I don't just mean extra people, extra functionality and extra processes, it really helps kind of level up the value that you're adding to your customers and broaden the perspectives of the whole team.
Teamwork makes the dream work. It is so simple. And I learned that from my first grader. That's what he's learning at school. And, look, we have a dependency on all of these things: security, the network, the database. And when we just have one part of the organization being efficient, it does us no good. Everybody needs to be pointing in the same direction. And the customer doesn't care that the release is taking 2 weeks after it was done from a development perspective to get the database update. They don't care. And we need to look at, use tools like, value stream mapping to look at our entire release process, include all of those parts that are needed for a successful software release, and assign a number to it. How long is it taking over here? That's how we improve that output number. That's how we improve that release time. We look at what does it take to get software out? What is the biggest blocker? What we found is one of the biggest one is the database, but there are other ones as well. And resolve it and lather, rinse, repeat. Do it over and over again and continue to improve.
You know what? And I love that you mentioned value stream mapping, right? So in terms of big blockers, identifying your constraint is a huge, huge piece, right? So I'm apparently today is book club, so I'm going to mention another great book to read. Mm-hmm. Karen Martin did a fantastic job of writing up value stream mapping. It won a Shingo. Okay, so when we're done with this, I'm going to start tweeting out today's book club set of reading lists. Identify, and value stream mapping helps you identify and understand your constraints from a process point of view. So many times I see the change approval process showing up as a constraint. More and more, I do see databases showing up as a constraint. I'm seeing architecture show up as a constraint, right? These are big pieces right now. And if you can pull core stakeholders on your team together and pull together a value stream map, and in the words of Courtney Kissler, honor and extract the reality from your team members, right? See what's really happening. Okay, so here's what we see when we compare our high performers and our low performers. You can have more speed, right? If we want to speed this process up, high performers are more agile. We see 46 times more frequent code deployments. This is the difference between deploying multiple times a day and once a week or less. We also see faster lead times from commit to deploy. That's 440 times. It's the difference between less than an hour and more than a week. Now, as I said, they go together though. It goes together with stability. So high performing teams, We see 96 times faster MTTR. This one makes me cringe. High performers recover in less than an hour instead of several days. There are companies out there that are still down for days at a time. Now, we also see that high performers are 1/5 as likely that their changes will fail. So again, like it all comes together. Now, if you take a look at this, I lovingly call this my eye chart. Teams can take a look at this and they can see where they fall. And if you're in a large organization, this will be different across teams. I'm sure you see this with so many of the customers you work with, Robert. This chart will not apply to an entire organization, especially with larger organizations, right? Because different teams fall into different pockets.
Yeah, that reminds me of that Gibson quote. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Yes, exactly. and we do see that the industry changes year over year over year. So this comes from the 2017 State of DevOps report that Dora did in cooperation with Puppet. So this sort of pulls me into my favorite, right, everyone get comfortable, maturity models. So it's really interesting. I work with so many companies and so many people, and they all want a maturity model. Do you ever get this, Robert?
Yeah.
Or readiness, right? What's my DevOps readiness?
And then we have to talk them down.
and then we have to give them some love, right? Because let's be real, maturity models are for chumps. So, I mean, this comes from World of Warcraft. I am a nerd. I used to be an even bigger nerd. I don't know, I'm probably a bigger nerd now. But like, here's my fun example, right? For those of you who do not play World of Warcraft, I'm going to assume that you have heard of World of Warcraft. Excuse me. This was the World of Warcraft map, the world, if you will, the world of World of Warcraft, when it first came out in the early 2000s. So if we were to make a maturity model for World of Warcraft, let's say, I think it went to like level 60. Then let's say that like level 40 was good and level 50 was great and level 60 was amazing, right? And like you would have to also make it to like one of the lands and like have a, I don't know, that sounds good to me, right? I'm making this up as I go. So that sounds amazing, right? Well, then fast forward a decade or more, right? 15 years, 16 years, 17 years. This is what World of Warcraft looks like now, right? This is now the world. The landscape has changed, right? Literally, the landscape has changed. There are more lands now. So if you only go to one land, there's way more to go to. So you're like way out of luck. Also, it used to go to level 60. It now goes to level 110. So your level 60 of amazing is now, you suck, right? You are nowhere near anything. They now have way more tooling than they used to have before. They now have like animals and pets and things that did not even exist before. Also, by the way, is any of this sounding anything at all like technology? And not just technology, but business, right? The business landscape has changed. The technology landscape has changed. Like Docker wasn't even really a thing that people were talking about. Like Kubernetes was not something that people were talking about in the early 2000s. Like containers were not something that almost everyone was universally using in the early 2000s. So many things have changed. And so if you are banking your business on a maturity model, that's not a great place to be, because all that does is lull you into a false sense of security. And if you're just going to say, oh, well, I'll update it every single year, that still doesn't help for several reasons. One, well, first of all that does is it tells you if you have arrived or not. Well, if you're going to update it every single year, well, that's okay. I'm happy for you. Second, the industry does change every single year. So I've been running the State of DevOps report for the last 4 years. The industry has changed drastically every single year. Second or third, I've already lost track because I get too excited about this. Maturity models are not appropriate for things like technology transformations because they assume that everything moves in a lockstep process, right? Everyone wants to get to level 4, level 5, right? Have you noticed that, Robert? Maturity models are always end at level 5. Who picked level 5?
Oh
It's
yeah.
always level 5.
Oh, level 5, you're done. That's the optimizing.
It's magical level 5, right? It's interesting though, because like level 1, everyone assumes level 1 is like the same things. And then you go to level 2, which is the same set of things. And then you go to level 3, which is the same set of things. Look around your own organizations. Do all of your teams look like the same lockstep level of things? And look at your friends' organizations. Do they all fall into the same lockstep level of things? No, absolutely not. Some teams are amazing at some things and they really suck at other things. Other teams are amazing at some things and suck at other things. We're all a different mix of different skills and capabilities based on our context. And to get better, you need to focus on certain different things that doesn't follow the same linear lockstep process. That's why we need to have a capabilities model so that we can focus on the things that we're weak in and that are our constraints, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of a maturity model that, okay, once we hit level 5, we're done. And you could apply this like, okay, well, we're at level 5 for how we use Java application servers, and your whole organization is dedicated to using that tech. Well, guess what? If you're completely directed at that maturity model, you are not even going to look at containers, which is a far better solution. It doesn't give you the ability to explore new things, to improve. It gives you this, okay, the road stops here and you're satisfied with it. And you know what? Your competitors aren't. They are blasting through this and they're not following this maturity model. They're saying, how do we get software out faster? How do we get better software out for our customers? And the maturity model doesn't handle that. It just stops. The sidewalk ends, so to speak.
Yes.
But in business, it don't. It keeps going. And the people of that continue to push, the companies that continue to drive to higher and higher performance, they will succeed. And none of that is captured in this maturity model. Not a bit.
Exactly. You know what? And you know what the thing that worries me the most about maturity models is what happens when you do arrive? You lose resources. And by resources, it can be a lot of things. That can be, money for sure, but also time and attention. What happens when your leadership, whether it's your manager or your executive, decides that they don't care about getting better anymore? Like that's bad news. That's way bad news. Okay, so maturity models are a bad idea for things that are highly complex, like technology transformations. Now, here's going to be my caveat. I think maturity models are okay in very, very isolated, simple cases, like one single tool. I think that makes sense, right? Like, we're going to be implementing configuration management, right? So we don't have it at all. So we're going to start with a small pilot program. Let's call that like level 1. And then we're going to deploy it more broadly. That's level 2. And then we're going to have base efficiency or knowledge of it. And then we're going to have expert level knowledge. And then we're going to have it like deployed throughout the organization at expert level, right? Oh, look at that. I just came up with 5 levels. Maybe that's why, right? It's the magical level 5.
Mm-hmm.
Like that sort of makes sense because having a basic lockstep progression makes sense because it's only one thing, right? It's not a complex interdependent play of several different things. It's one tool. And it actually makes sense to talk about like what level of tool deployment adoption and diffusion and deployment of a tool we have in an organization, even in a complex organization, like where is this division of the organization at in terms of configuration management or version control or something, right? Especially for rolling out new tools, that sort of makes sense.
It does. We've certainly seen this with Datical adoption. Customers use, a little bit in a pilot. Hey, how's this going to help us with updating our databases? And they'll start out with 1 or 2 applications, and the DBAs will be pushing it to production. And then they get to a point where there is trust is earned, it's established, and after I've seen this as quickly in 4 weeks. This happens as quickly. I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this, but in 4 weeks. I've seen people say, okay, we are no longer going to push the button. The DBAs are no longer going to push the Datical deploy button. We're going to integrate this with our ARA solutions. And so they take the next step and then the next step, and then they start diffusing this back to, all right, well, we're automating this across all environments. And then we're going to put this on another application, another app. And so then you start moving into optimization at that, level 5. But for using a tool, this absolutely applies. It is, there is a point of mastery and expertise with a tool because there is an endpoint. You have used the full capacity of functionality of that tool. Great, right? But you cannot confuse that with applying that to a business process. You can't apply it to how we work as an organization because there is a finite end. There is an end to functionality of a tool. There is no end to improvement to your organization.
Yeah, well, and even to the broader business market, right? I mean, the market grows and adapts and changes, and things move so quickly that we always need to be changing and adapting. But a tool adoption, like you said, it has at least a relative endpoint, right? And so much of what you said kind of resonated with the conversation we had the other day about learning models, right? And I think some of that is similar too, right? We can even think about tool adoption and use and implementation in organizations similar to learning. We can think about learning the same way. We become aware of a tool, we start playing with a tool or kicking the tires. We're beginners, we're novices, we're intermediate, and then we're experts at the tool, right? So that kind of follows similar progressions as well.
Yeah, there's that. The unconscious ignorance. And then conscious ignorance.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how we learn as humans. We don't know what we don't know, and eventually you become an expert at it. But you are never going to. Your organization will never be an expert at getting software out the door because there is no end. There's always areas to improve, and to cram a maturity model in here to model your progression. It's just that implied endpoint which doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's too tricky. I mean, I don't blame people for wanting it though, right? It would be great if we could distill all of that work down into a simple thing. So I don't blame people for it.
Oh no, not at all. Hey, software is hard, yo.
I know, right? Okay. So let's talk about a few additional resources before we start moving over into questions. So I referenced this briefly at the beginning. I have a new book out with my fabulous co-authors, Jez Humble and Jean Kim. We do talk about some of these concepts in the first couple of chapters. Also, data-driven. This is one of my favorite short books. I reference this all the time. It was written by DJ Patel and Hillary Mason. It's a free download. And it's about creating a data culture in your company and in your organization. So both of these reference that. This next resource, I'm going to let you talk about, Robert, because this is also fabulous, and you know a little more about it than I do.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah. So what we worked with Dimensional Research to really get a nice idea of what is currently going on around database deployment challenges and what is the impact, if any, on delivering software. Spoiler alert, it is a pretty big impact. And so it's really interesting because this is from a bunch of different folks, stakeholders in organizations, and they weigh in on what their challenges are. And I think it's a good read because it really helps folks that are on this webinar to understand that the challenges that they're facing are, one, shared with other folks, and two, there is a way to resolve it. There are folks that are solving this problem.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a preview to that earlier, and it's some really interesting stuff. And like you said, it's almost like nice to know that the pain is shared.
I'm not the only
way
one.
Forward.
Yeah,
I know. It's super helpful. Okay, now you can help, right? Where else can we go? What's next? So when we do this, we can start by measuring a few things in our own organizations. Focus on outcomes and global measures. And then think about what things that you control yourself, what is within your purview that can help drive impacts here in those measures, right? So it could be smaller local things, but make sure that it's kind of driving toward, again, those outcomes and global measures. And they're not just isolated. And for bonus points, try to think about things that are both tech and not tech. So maybe cultural measures, maybe process measures, right? Robert brought up visual stream mapping.
Mm-hmm.
And then also share your stories and leverage your community, right? Definitely reach out to other people because there is such a wealth of knowledge that exists, right? I think that's one reason that I love DevOps so much is you're not just like trapped in your little silo or stuck on your island by yourself. There have always been so many people out there that have been willing to like reach out and help and like offer advice and ideas and guidance and what they did and what was helpful for them. So
yeah, and if you have the opportunity to work for a very large company, you can create a community inside that company as well. I guarantee you that there are high performing groups inside your company today, and you can learn from them. And there might be some things that you are doing on your team that others could benefit from as well. And so if you are working in a industry that might be heavily regulated, perhaps you have a corporate culture of keeping your cards close to your chest, this is a good way of creating an internal community that you can certainly benefit from.
yes, I really, really love that point, right? Because there's always meetups, but sometimes you just can't share very much of what you do. Or maybe you are in kind of a smaller town or there just really aren't meetups. Or maybe meetups aren't your jam, or you have family or loved ones to care for, and so you just don't have evenings available. Yeah, reach out at your workplace, do brown bags. I love that point. Love that point. Okay, now we have just a few minutes left if we want to cover some questions.
Right, we got about, I would say 12 minutes, well, make that 11 minutes to the top of the hour. So we do have time for 3 or 4 questions. It's not too late though. If you have a question for Nicole or Robert, please go ahead and use that control panel, get it in. Whatever questions we don't get to during the event, just know that Robert and Nicole both will be receiving a copy of all of the questions. So I'm sure they'll be, or somebody from the organization will be happy to follow up with you offline later on. Let's go ahead and start with the questions now. First one is from Rob, who asks, would a metric like mean time to deploy be a reasonable measure of performance or at least automation?
So mean time to deploy sounds very much like lead time. So code commit to code deploy. Mean, like an average mean, sounds interesting. I would hear a couple thoughts off the top of my head. I think it would be cool. I would definitely be interested in taking a look at that. I would also take a look at what your distribution looks like, right? So, excuse me. How does your so when you take a look at all of your data points, right? Do they follow an average distribution? Do you have a lot of variability in your distribution? So variability is super, super, super interesting because it helps you understand how predictable your pipeline, your data is. So in this case, how predictable is your pipeline, which gives you kind of a hint to how much do you have to improve, right? If your variability is low, then you have high predictability, and your mean time to deploy is probably going to be pretty indicative, and your lead time, hopefully your lead time is going to be relatively low, and then mean is going to be a pretty good indicator. So I like that. That's going to be probably a relatively good metric. So when we report out, just as an FYI, as a side note, when we report out our lead time metrics, we report out a median because our distributions are not normal. And most distributions in tech are not normal. So we report the median because that's less influenced by outliers.
Okay.
Great question.
Right.
That was an amazing question. Thanks, Rob.
Well, if you liked that one, he's got a follow-up question for you, which is why can't you use maturity models with process adoption, i.e. TDD adopted by teams, etc.?
You know what? That one, that's also a great question. You might be able to if it's in the very, very isolated case, right? So maybe within a particular team, within a particular organization, if you're using it for the purpose of rolling out a new process, like we want to do TDD and we want to capture and understand how well TDD adoption is progressing within the organization, right? But only if it's like specific to just TDD, right? And I like that example and specifically how it was used, right? I want to understand how a process such as TDD is being rolled out within an organization. That's not too bad, right? And the example I gave earlier was a tooling or technology within an organization. That's okay. And, my follow-on example was something like learning. That's okay. A process is something that can be learned. Where I would find it relatively problematic is if you want to say, I want to use a maturity model to understand the rollout of an entire technology transformation, because that is the complex interplay of several things, because then you don't know what should come next, right? Do I want to focus on TDD next? Do I want to focus on WIP limits next? Do I want to focus on continuous delivery next? Do I want to focus on version control next? Do I want to focus on monitoring next? I don't know what should be next to help me accelerate my transformation in the best possible way. If you already have decided that TDD is going to be an important process and skill for your people to learn, go ahead and use a maturity model type of communication, type of framework to communicate the progress of that training and skill. That's fine, right? Call it whatever you want to call it. We are at level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or we are at level introduction, we are at level base training, we are at level implementation, we are at level common practice, we are at level expertise. That's fine.
All right, great. Robert, do you have anything you want to add to that, or should we just keep plowing along?
Oh, let's go to that next question.
Okay. All right, great. Next question is from Chris. He asks, hi, is there any hope for non-startups with hundreds of years of combined organizational luggage for squeezing the best out of a DevOps culture?
Yes. Yes,
Absolutely.
there is.
Awesome. I mean, I'm going to let you take this, Robert, but I'm going to say 1,000%. Absolutely.
It all, thank you. It all starts with snapping the chalk line. All right. At first, you have this large organization. You're doing things for reasons that were that have escaped you. Historical, this is how we've always done it. So measure it. Measure the outcome. It takes, X number of days for lead time today. All right, cool. So let's get an idea of what our mean time to resolution is, our lead time, our deployment frequency. Let's figure out these numbers. All right, snap the chalk line. Great. Now let's take this next step, which is value stream mapping. Let's identify areas that are the biggest friction point in releasing that software. Let's not worry about lines of code. Let's not worry about velocity, capacity, those things. Forget about it. Okay, go through and find out where your software is stuck for days. Is it security review? Is it architecture review? Is it the database team? Identify those areas and then focus like a laser to fix them in one small team. And then measure before, you snap the chalk line, so that's easy, and then measure after. You're going to see an improvement. Then roll that change, that improvement out to other folks, lunch and learns, share the findings with those other teams, build that community internally. Then tackle the next friction point and the next friction point. At some point, you will find that you are moving at the same speed that those little tiny startups that are trying to take your high margin business away from you. That's it. It is not hard, but it takes diligence, it takes dedication, and it takes a commitment from the organization to improve.
All right. Nicole, do you have anything that you want to add on to what Robert said?
No, that was perfect. I would have called those friction points constraints, identify the constraint, but that was exactly it. It was perfect.
All right. Great. Great. I think we have time for one more question, then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. It is from John, who asks, any recommendations on reconciling global and team measures with the inertia of individual performance evaluations and managers evaluated on siloed team performance metrics?
So don't have individual performance.
Well.
Individual performance measures are actually really bad. We should, and this is known, right? It is known. The best thing to do is to have team performance measurements, and then, and if you don't have power over that, that's sort of tough. And so we've been trying to work on this throughout the industry lately. It's been written up in, I think, Harvard Business Review. You can Google it. There was an interesting study, Deloitte worked on that as well. And then when managers are totally siloed, that's kind of a tough uphill battle to fight. But there's definitely a lot of work that's been done that shows that the best way to measure performance is at the team level.
I would just add one thing to this, and this is for John. All right, who asked a question. John, find a sympathetic executive who is frustrated, just like you are, is seeing that the organization is measuring the wrong thing, and team with that person to get air cover to try an experiment. Try one team where we're not going to do individual metrics. We're going to focus on team output, and we're going to measure that team against a similar team and see what our change does to improve the output. If the to improve the outcome. If you show that you have improved, then that executive now has the firepower, the evidence to roll this out to a larger group. But if you want to make change in your organization, if you are a believer and you're in it to win it, then you need to find partners that can give you the air cover that you need to improve that organization. It's tough, it's going to be hard, but if you're successful, I guarantee you're going to get a promotion.
All right, then. Those are strong words, and hopefully they'll work out for John. That is all the time that we have today for questions. I want to thank everybody who did submit a question. We still have quite a few that we didn't get to, and I apologize for that. But as I said before, Nicole and Robert will be receiving a copy of the questions. So hopefully somebody will be following up with you forthwith. Also, just a reminder, today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, please realize that you will have you'll be receiving a link via email to the webinar on demand. So you can listen to it, share it with your friends, and generally have a good time. Also, you're also going to be getting a link today in the follow-up email that goes to the research report that Robert was referencing earlier that was on Nicole's reference page. So fear not, you'll be receiving that as well. The webinar is also going to be on the DevOps.com page, or the DevOps.com website. So feel free to check it out there as well. We've also got a ton of other webinars on tap there. So take a look, see if there's anything you like. But for now, I would like to thank Robert and Nicole, both of you, for presenting such a great webinar. Lots of fun today. Thanks, guys. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Well, everybody have a great day. This is Charlene O'Hanlon signing off.